Have you ever noticed how it's almost comforting to believe that the problem lies with others? That we're too deep, too sensitive, too complex for this world of shallow conversations and disposable connections? There's something seductive about that narrative. It transforms loneliness into a badge of superiority. But what if this carefully constructed identity, this label of introverted intuitive that we wear like a medal, is nothing more than armor? What if the real self is trapped inside it, repeating the same protection that once saved our life, but today only prevents us from living it? There are people isolated in their rooms right now, reading about Jungian archetypes at 3 in the morning, convinced they've found their truth, that they've finally understood themselves. Introverted, intuitive, different. But the real question isn't who am I? It's what am I running from? Because there's a brutal difference between choosing solitude and being held hostage by it. Between recharging energy in quietness and using silence as a bunker against a world that, deep down, we're scared to death to face again. That tightness in your chest when someone invites you out. The instant fatigue just from thinking about being around people. We call this temperament. But it might be unresolved trauma asking for attention. The seduction of this solitary identity is real. It offers something every wounded human being desperately desires: validation without vulnerability. By defining yourself as someone naturally averse to social interaction, you create a narrative that protects the ego. The story becomes beautiful. There was no rejection, misunderstanding, or ridicule until you learned that hiding was safer. You were simply born this way: deep, introspective, rare, and completely protected. Think about it. How many times have we used the phrase, "People don't understand me"? How many times have we consoled ourselves thinking that loneliness is a sign of depth, not fear? It's comforting to believe that. It means we don't have to do anything. We don't have to risk being seen again. We don't have to face the possibility that maybe, just maybe, the problem isn't the superficial world out there, but the wound we never treated. Carl Jung spent his life studying the human psyche, and one of the biggest confusions we make with his work is transforming introversion into romantic pathology. Jung described introversion as a legitimate energetic orientation. Now, introverted people process the world internally. They recharge in solitude. They prefer depth over quantity in relationships. This is real. This exists. But Jung never said introverts should run from the world. Individuation, the process of becoming who we truly are, doesn't happen in an isolated cave, scrolling through feeds about esoteric philosophy. It requires confrontation with the collective. It requires relationship. It requires the mirror of others so we can see our own shadow and integrate it. Jung was clear. You don't individuate alone. We become whole individuals through the tension between uniqueness and connection with the world. So when someone uses Jung to justify years locked in their room, avoiding any form of real intimacy, they're not practicing depth psychology. They're practicing sophisticated avoidance. Back when we were still small enough to believe the world was safe, we tried to show ourselves. Maybe sharing a thought that seemed important. Maybe expressing an emotion that hurt. Maybe trying to be seen exactly as we were. And someone, parents, peers, some adult who should have protected us, invalidated it. They laughed. They ignored. They said we were too sensitive, too dramatic, too weird. That hurt in a way no child has the tools to process. So we did what every wounded child does. We created a survival rule. If I show myself, I'll get hurt. That rule worked. It protected. It kept us safe in an environment that didn't know how to handle who we were. But here's the problem. We never revised that rule. We grew up. The environment changed. The people around us changed. But deep down, operating on autopilot, that wounded child is still making decisions. Still believes that intimacy is danger. that being seen is an invitation to pain, avoiding, protecting ourselves, calling it temperament when in reality it's just fear that was never named. There's a brilliant psychological trick we do without realizing it. When the pain of connecting becomes unbearable, we don't admit we're scared. That would be too vulnerable. So we intellectualize, we sophisticate, we transform trauma into philosophy. We start getting interested in Jung, Nietzsche, Schopenhauer. We read about archetypes, individuation, the will as suffering. Is this genuine? Of course. But be honest, isn't part of that interest also an elegant justification for withdrawal? They don't understand me because I'm too deep is a much more palatable narrative than I'm afraid to be vulnerable again. We cultivate an intellectual identity. We talk about symbolism, synchronicity, the collective shadow. And each concept we master adds another layer of protection. Another reason to believe that loneliness isn't a symptom. It's a sign of evolution, that we're above the masses trapped in their superficial lives. This is what we call narcissistic defense. Not necessarily in the clinical sense, but in the sense that we inflate one part, intellectual depth, to compensate for the part that was wounded and rejected. It's a sophisticated shield, and it works perfectly, until the day we realize we're more alone than ever, and in all that depth doesn't warm anything when the house is empty and the silence weighs heavy. Arthur Schopenhauer hated people. He was explicit about it. He saw humanity as a blind manifestation of will, condemned to perpetual suffering. His philosophy is brilliant, but it's also the worldview of a deeply embittered man who romanticized his misanthropy. He transformed isolation into philosophical virtue. And you know what happens when we read Schopenhauer while wounded, without having processed our own pain? We don't absorb the philosophy. We absorb the validation. Finally, someone who understands. Someone brilliant, recognized, who confirms that the problem is with the world, not with us. That life is suffering, that others are fools trapped in illusions, that solitude is wisdom. As Schopenhauer wrote brilliant pages about the nature of human suffering, about how our desires condemn us to perpetual frustration. And there's truth in that. But he also spent his entire life fighting with neighbors, distrusting everyone, unable to maintain lasting relationships. He died with his dog as his only consistent companion, not because he chose solitude after fully exploring human connection, but because he never developed the capacity to trust. See the difference? He created a philosophy that justified his relational limitations. He elevated his wound to the status of metaphysical insight. And it works. It's seductively coherent. But in the end, what do we have? An entire life theoretically defending why isolation is superior, while inside we die a little each day from unchosen solitude. I know it's hard to hear this. That maybe Schopenhauer's genius came despite the isolation, not because of it. Would his philosophy be even deeper if he had managed to love someone without fear? Or are we confusing the scars of a wounded man with the map for our own evolution? Romanticizing bitterness as wisdom is dangerous, because it validates pain without asking for change. It allows us to stay exactly where we are, now with philosophical backing. But remember, Schopenhauer died alone and unhappy. If that's what we want to validate, then we move forward. But if deep down we suspect there's another possibility, that maybe real wisdom includes the courage to open up despite the risk, then maybe it's time to question which philosophers we're using as shields. Have you noticed the cycle? We distance ourselves from people because we're afraid of getting hurt. Then, because we're distant, nobody really knows us. And because nobody knows us, we confirm the belief. See, nobody understands me anyway. It's a perfect self-fulfilling prophecy. We're not being rejected. We're hiding so well that we don't even give ourselves a chance to be seen. But since the traumatized brain doesn't distinguish between protection and prison, we interpret our own isolation as evidence that the world is hostile, that we tried and it didn't work. But did we really try? Or did we approach with full armor, expecting rejection, ready to retreat at the first sign of misunderstanding. This mechanism is unconscious. We don't wake up thinking, today I'm going to sabotage my connections. But every time someone gets close, that wounded part triggers an alarm. And we retreat. We send vague messages, we cancel plans, we create emotional distance. All very subtle, all justifiable. I wasn't feeling well. I need some time alone. I'm too busy. And people eventually stop trying, not because we're too deep for them, but because we're too inaccessible. And then we're there, alone again, confirming the story we've always told, that we're different, that we don't belong, that solitude is our natural destiny, when in reality, it's just the consequence of trauma we never faced. There's solitude that nourishes. Jung knew this. He spent entire seasons isolated, dialoguing with his unconscious, carving mandalas, exploring his dreams. This is creative solitude. It's a conscious choice to withdraw and then return to the world transformed. It's movement. There's life in it. There's purpose. There's return. In this solitude, we create things. We process experiences. We integrate fragmented parts. We emerge from it with more clarity, more energy, more presence to offer when we return. It's like breathing. We inhale to be able to exhale. We withdraw to be able to expand. There's a healthy rhythm in this. But there's another type. Defensive isolation. The kind that isn't choice. It's compulsion. We're not withdrawing to process and grow. We're hiding to avoid feeling. It's not rest. It's perpetual escape. In this solitude, we don't create anything. We only consume. Endless scrolling. Videos about philosophy we never apply. Books we read but never integrate because integration requires confrontation with the real world. And the difference between the two is brutal. How do we know which one we're living? Ask, does this nourish me or protect me? When we're alone, do we feel genuine peace or just relief from not having to pretend? When we return to the world, do we come back renewed or just anxious again? Creative solitude fills us. It makes you more whole. Defensive solitude slowly empties us, leaving only the void we try to fill with more philosophy, more content, more justifications to never risk again. Another difference? Creative solitude has a deadline. Jung would withdraw, but he'd return. He'd come back to his wife, to his patients, to the world. He knew that individuation doesn't end in retreat. It ends in reintegration. We process alone, but we only confirm the transformation when we can bring it into relationships, when we can be vulnerable again without collapsing. Defensive isolation has no deadline. We've been saying, just a little more time alone for 3 years. We promise we'll open up when we're ready, but that readiness never comes because we confuse preparation with infinite procrastination. The truth? We're never going to feel ready. Because feeling ready for vulnerability is impossible. We only learn by being vulnerable, making mistakes, surviving, repeating. The favorite narrative of those who isolate. The people out there are too superficial. Have we said this? Have we thought this while looking at someone laughing at silly things, enjoying simple things, living a life that seems empty to us? Here's the uncomfortable truth. Do we really know these people? Or did we judge them from a distance based on fragments because it was safer than risking getting close? How many deep conversations did we really try to have before deciding nobody was on our level? How many times did we give someone a real chance to surprise us? I understand it hurts to recognize this, but it turns out we project. We attribute to the world our own inability to connect. It's not that people are shallow. It's that we're so protected, so armed with distrust and fear that any interaction becomes theater. We don't really show ourselves. So how could anyone really know us? And yes, superficial people exist. Of course. But there are also incredible deep people waiting for someone who has the courage to go beyond the social script. We'll never find them if we keep using the wound as a lens to see the world. Because trauma isn't intuition. A trauma is a distorted filter that confirms what we already believe. That connection is dangerous and solitude is inevitable. We call it heightened intuition. This ability to read between the lines, notice micro-expressions, feel the energy of environments and people before even interacting. And we're partly right. We really do have this sensitivity. But where does it come from? Jung valued intuition connected to the self, that hunch that emerges from the unconscious, guiding us toward what is true. But what we're experiencing isn't that. It's hypervigilance. It's a nervous system on constant alert, scanning for danger because back then we learned we needed to always be prepared. That letting our guard down was an invitation to pain. This isn't a gift. It's a symptom of complex trauma. We're not reading the essence of people. We're looking for signs of rejection before it happens. Interpreting neutrality as coldness, silence as disinterest. Everything becomes a threat when we live in survival mode disguised as personality. Real Jungian intuition connects us with the flow of life. It helps us navigate the collective unconscious, perceive synchronicities, trust the process. Traumatic hypervigilance disconnects us. It traps us in a state of perpetual tension where we never relax because we never feel safe. And we confuse this with depth, with wisdom, when in reality, it's just fear operating on autopilot. Jung had a brutal concept called the shadow. Everything we reject in ourselves, we bury in the unconscious because it's too painful to admit. And then here's what many introverted intuitives don't want to hear. We also have a shadow, and it includes exactly what we deny most. The desire to belong, to be seen, to be validated, to connect without fear, to laugh at silly things without judging ourselves, to be loved not for our depth, but for our imperfect and messy humanity. We deny these needs because admitting them would be too vulnerable. It would be recognizing that we're not so different after all, that deep down we want what everyone wants. So we bury it. We call it stuff for superficial people. We create unconscious resentment against those who live these needs openly because they remind us of what we don't have the courage to pursue. And this rejected shadow? It doesn't disappear. It leaks out in cynical comments about other people's relationships, in silent contempt for those who seem happy with simple things, in excessive pride in our own difference. All of this is the shadow screaming, "I want this too, but I'm too scared to admit it." We're in the right group, misunderstood introverts, intuitives in a world of sensors, deep people surrounded by superficiality. Every post validates the narrative. Every comment confirms we're not alone in this loneliness. How ironic. Social media and its algorithms have created perfect bubbles for us to never grow. We find thousands of people with the same wound, all mutually validating isolation as identity. Nobody questions, nobody challenges. It's comforting, but it traps us in a static narrative. We're not getting to know ourselves. We're repeating who we believe we are. And there's a difference. Real self-knowledge is fluid. It includes change. It includes the possibility that maybe we're not exactly who we thought, that maybe introversion has more to do with fear than with essence. But if we're surrounded by people saying, "We're perfect like this, the world is what's wrong," we'll never question. And look, I understand the comfort. After years of feeling out of place, finally finding a tribe, even if virtual, that accepts us is powerful. But ask yourself, is this acceptance helping us grow or just keeping us safe in the same place? Because individuation isn't comfort. It's tension. It's conflict between what we are and what we can become. If we're too comfortable, we're probably not evolving. In the early years, we isolated because we needed to. It was legitimate protection against an invalidating environment. But over time, Isolation became a comfort zone. The social world became genuinely scary, not because we're too different, but because we lost practice. The muscle of vulnerability atrophied. The ability to navigate casual conversations, to tolerate misunderstandings without collapsing, to trust even without guarantees. All of this got rusty. And now when we think about exposing ourselves, the panic is real. The body freezes. The mind invents 1,000 excuses. And we interpret this as evidence that we really weren't made for this. I know it seems unfair to realize this now, but it's not essence. It's consequence. Consequence of years avoiding exactly what the nervous system needs to regulate. Safe connection. And the more we avoid, the scarier it gets. The scarier it gets, the more we avoid. It's a self-feeding cycle. And we call it personality, when in reality, it's untreated trauma creating increasingly larger limitations in life. If you're enjoying this content, check out in the first comment our exclusive ebook, Alchemy and Archetypes. Here's what Jung really said about individuation, without the romantic filters the internet has placed on top. Individuation isn't becoming an enlightened hermit on a mountain. It's not rejecting the collective in the name of special uniqueness. It's exactly the opposite. Individuation is becoming fully who we are in relation to the world. It's integrating uniqueness with shared humanity. It's recognizing that we only become whole individuals through tension with the other. Alone, we only see what we want to see. We only confirm what we already believe. It's in relational friction that the shadow emerges. It's in the mirror of others that we see the patterns we unconsciously repeat. Jung spent years dialoguing with his unconscious, but he was also married, had patience, lived in community. He knew that true transformation requires both, the internal dive and the external confrontation. We can't individuate in a cave. We don't truly grow scrolling philosophical posts at 3 a.m. We grow by taking risks, showing ourselves, falling, getting up, repeating until intimacy stops seeming like a death trap. We know something isn't right. Deep down, underneath all the theories and justifications, we feel it. So here are some markers, some signs that what we call introversion is actually trauma asking for attention. Solitude brings momentary relief, but then comes chronic emptiness. We feel anger towards superficial people with disproportionate frequency. We have excessive pride in being different, as if we constantly need to prove worth through uniqueness. Brutal difficulty sustaining relationships, even when someone shows genuine interest. Small misunderstandings feel like total rejections. We prefer connections at a distance, online, theoretical, over face-to-face and risky intimacy. None of this is a personality trait. It's a symptom of an active wound. It's the nervous system screaming that it's still operating with the survival ruler we created back then, when we needed it. But we don't need it anymore. The environment changed. We grew. But that wounded part doesn't know this. It still thinks showing ourselves means dying. And until we recognize this, really recognize it, not just intellectually agree, we'll remain trapped, calling essence what is just fossilized fear. So what's the way out? Because if we've made it this far, we're probably feeling something uncomfortable. Maybe anger, maybe recognition, maybe fear that I'm right, and we've wasted years avoiding what we really need to face. It's understandable to feel that. The way out isn't to force extroversion. It's not pretending we love parties and shallow conversations when we don't. The way out is graduated vulnerability. It's starting small, one person at a time, one piece of truth at a time. Not handing over your entire soul on the first meeting and then collapsing when the person doesn't know how to handle it. That's self-sabotage, not a genuine attempt. Choose someone safe, someone who has shown consistency, and share something small but real. Observe what happens. Observe if the world really crumbles or if maybe we can sustain a bit of exposure without disintegrating. Repeat. gradually. Give time for the nervous system to learn that intimacy can be safe, that not all vulnerability ends in pain. This isn't shallow self-help therapy. It's reconditioning trauma. It's teaching that wounded part that the world has changed, that we have resources now that we didn't have at 7 years old, that we can choose who gets close, that we can leave if it's not safe, that we're not trapped like we were when we created that survival rule that still governs our life. There's a part that was exiled, the part that wanted to be seen, that wanted to belong, that believed it could be loved exactly as it was. And when that part was wounded, we buried it. We sent it away, because it hurt too much to keep it alive. Jung would call this reintegration of complexes. Healing isn't killing that part. It's rescuing it, bringing it back, dialoguing with it, asking, "What do you need from me now?" And listening, really listening. Maybe it needs us to stop using intellectualization as a shield. Maybe it needs us to stop being proud of solitude and admit that it hurts, that we're tired, that we want to be seen, but we're scared. Admitting this isn't weakness. It's the beginning of real freedom, because only when we stop defending the wound as identity can we begin to heal it. Only when we recognize that solitude isn't spiritual superiority, but outdated protection, can we begin to choose differently. And choosing differently hurts. But it's the pain of growth, not repetition. It's the pain that liberates, not the one that traps. And deep down, we know this. We're just afraid to admit it. Real individuation, the kind Jung actually defended, isn't about being an enlightened lone wolf. It's about freedom of choice. It's being able to choose to be alone when it serves, and choose to connect when it nourishes. But to choose, consciously, not automatically react to the same old fear. Authentic introversion coexists with deep connections, with real intimacy, with selective but present vulnerability. Trauma only coexists with avoidance, with compulsory isolation, with the perpetual feeling of being protected but empty. So here's the question only we can answer. Are we choosing life or just reacting to the wound? When we're alone, is it because we really want to be, or because we're afraid of what happens if we're not? When we distance ourselves, is it self-care or disguised self-protection? When we judge the world as superficial, is it real discernment or projection of our own fear of relational depth? We don't need to answer now, but we need to start asking these questions. Because real life, the kind Jung called full individuation, isn't in the books we read alone in our room. It's in the risk, in the mistake, in the vulnerable moment we survive and realize we didn't die. It's in discovering we can be seen and remain whole, that we can be rejected and not collapse, that we can connect without losing ourselves. This won't happen while we use depth as a shield, while we romanticize the wound as wisdom. But it can start now, not with grand gestures, with one small step toward what we fear most, being truly known. And maybe we'll discover that on the other side of fear isn't the disaster we imagined. Maybe it's just the life we always wanted to live, waiting for us to have the courage to show up for it.